Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our great friend Michael Rivero is standing by. Go to whatreallyhappened.com. Fantastic journalist, terrific broadcaster. His own programme, which is syndicated by the GCN network, is outstanding listening. It really is. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I don't say it very often about programmes these days. He's had more careers than there have been Doctor Who's. Let's welcome back to the programme our great friend Michael Rivero. And Mike, of course, I'm referring to your career in show business and that as well, so I wasn't being disingenuous there.
Yeah, I was going to say, the way you're talking, it sounds like I can't hang on to a job.
Which isn't true, because you've been doing this job quite a long time and doing it very well too. Aloha, my friend. How are things? Busy, I guess.
Yeah, they're very busy. We're looking, obviously, we're into our primary season here for the elections in the United States. We're looking at what appears to be the doorstep to a major ground invasion of Syria by Turkey and Saudi Arabia acting as proxies for the United States, which still has an ambition of getting Assad out of Damascus and replacing him with a pliant Western puppet ruler. So things are very much hectic right now.
Things are crazy. You mentioned the primaries. When we can come back to the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis urging or egging on the US to lead a ground invasion of Syria, we can certainly come back to that. I've got a lot of listeners, Michael, particularly on the east coast of the United States, and many of them in the very early days, I think like yourself, happy to hear some of the things that Donald Trump was saying in his campaign. Some of the things he was saying, I certainly couldn't disagree with respects to changes he would make domestically, changes he would make to taxation and stuff like that. When you hear them debating in recent weeks and you hear them talking about not escalating, but not only would waterboarding be acceptable, but they would do an awful lot worse. We don't want to hear that sort of stuff, Michael, do we?
No, we don't. But one of the reasons Trump is so popular right now is he comes out of the world of business, where your word is basically very important. If people cannot trust you, they're not going to do business with you, and you go out of business. And that's in stark contrast with the world of politics, where everybody lies all the time about everything and says whatever they think the voters and taxpayers want to hear. And so Trump is coming into this with a reputation of not only being an outsider to the establishment, he's a straight talker. And you may not agree with everything that he says, and I certainly don't, but you are hearing what he really believes on these issues, as opposed to somebody like Hillary Clinton, who changes her position based on whatever audience is in front of her at the time. And that's a very refreshing change in American politics. So a lot of people, I think they're looking at Trump simply as almost a form of voter rebellion against the entrenched career political elite who have just done a terrible job for the country and its people over the last couple of decades.
Mike, when you have a look back, and we've had this debate before, you and I, so I don't want to repeat it. I want to move on to talk about Sanders and to talk about other things as well. When you do an examination of his career, he has been pretty cosy with the Clintons. Now, some of his supporters might say, well, that's basically the price of doing business. When Trump was doing business, the Clintons held power. Bill Clinton held office for 8 years, and Trump supporters would say, well, that's just the way it goes, and he might have had favours done, everybody had favours done, or whatever. But to me, he has questions to answer in terms of this. I'm completely separate from the establishment. Again, an examination of his career would suggest that he is establishment, Mike.
Well, you need to delineate between business, economic establishment, and political establishment. And it's that line that everybody understands stands between Trump and again, Washington, D.C. Now, it doesn't really matter who is in the White House. Everybody that is engaged in business has to go and be friends with them, not necessarily to get favors from them, but simply to avoid retributive taxation or regulation. Presidents have enemies lists. Nixon had one. The Clintons had one. Hillary has one, apparently. And you want to be on their good side, at least to sort of avoid being used as an example to prove that the government is taking a firm stand against whatever, and they just sort of pick you out to be the designated sacrificial lamb. And of course, at that level of our society, everybody does know everybody, 6 degrees of separation. And, you know, the history of American politics, you very often have people who start out as friends and they find themselves on the opposite side of an election. And there'll be a certain degree of animosity, and then after it's all over and the years roll on, they go back to being friends again. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But Trump is very clearly being perceived as an outsider to the political establishment, and that with his straight talking and his willingness to basically support potentially controversial positions like immigration, people are saying, yeah, it's a breath of fresh air.
Interesting story that I came across in the last couple of days, which I'm sure he'll be seizing on, Trump, and he'll be using it going forward to the forthcoming primaries. And that's the news that of the nearly 3,000 mosques in the United States, something like 80% of them receive funding from the Saudi Arabians.
Well, I'm not sure that that's really all that significant. I mean, there's a huge number of synagogues in the United States that get funding not only from Israel, but from the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm not entirely sure how much of an issue that is. Remember, during the Bush administration, there was his faith-based initiatives where Christian churches all across the country were getting government money. So, you know, there's always a tight relationship between religion and government because religion is one of the tools used to keep the population subservient and obedient to government, render unto Caesar and so forth.
You and I have been speaking for many years, of course, and one of the things that we spoke about very, very many times is the whole creation of money and central banks and the banking cartels and, of course, the existence of the Federal Reserve, which is central and fundamental to the problems that we have in the world today. Do we really believe that any of these people, let's just not keep focusing on Trump specifically, Michael, but even, you know, the favourite of the left, Bernie Sanders, do we really believe that any of these people will take on the Federal Reserve, will have a look at that whole nonsense and say, well, why are we borrowing money that doesn't exist from a group of unelected bankers that are basically holding the country to hostage? Why don't we look at that? Trump is never going to go after them, is he?
I don't think any of them are going to initiate an examination of the system of private central banking, but it is looking like there's going to be a major upset. We are hearing that Deutsche Bank may go under, and it has a huge derivatives exposure. And I think public outcry against debt-based currencies may force politicians to say, all right, we got to step back. We got to follow Iceland's example and say, you know, is this really a fundamentally sound way of running a national economy? And of course, the answer is no. That's why the United States was started without a private central bank. It was all government-issued, value-based currency, not accruing interest. And of course, private central bankers hate that. They want to subvert every nation on earth to their debt enslavement system. But right now, because of globalism, all of these private central banks are now strapped to each other. In the past, when a private central bank collapsed, the other nations with private central banks would step in and restart the scam. But we're looking at a very real possibility that the entire private central banking system could come down all at one time. And we need to basically be educating the people of planet Earth to be ready to stand up and say, okay, we're going to restart the economy with government-issued public currency managed as a public utility, no more private central banking. And if there are enough people who are saying that, politicians being politicians are going to jump on board that and say, yes, I'm supporting the will of the people. And they're going to look at that. And now we know the private central bankers have a huge amount of wealth. But if you think about it, it's all just ink and paper and numbers in a computer.
It is, Mike. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It is until they go after a country that they've deliberately forced into debt to take the real wealth of that country, and then they start taking property and contracts, rail, utility companies. You're absolutely 100% right. Just on the Deutsche Bank thing, Mike, you're right. Deutsche Bank has been having a difficult time. The BBC reports today that their shares have bounced back after yesterday's disastrous low, but it is in serious trouble. You've neatly segued, Mike, into something that our listeners wanted to put to you. A lot of our listeners believe there is a planned and an imminent, and of course it's planned, massive financial global currency crash, which you've just alluded to there. We don't do fear porn on this programme. You don't either. It's why I recommend whatreallyhappened.com. It's cold analysis, not fear porn. Mike, when is this catastrophic currency global crash going to happen, and what are going to be the early signs of it?
Well, we're already seeing the early signs here, and there is a crash. I disagree with the idea that it's being planned and scheduled. The problem is they can't stop it, because the fundamental design of private central banking is that it will produce more debt than money with which to pay that debt, until the debt grows to a point where it strangles the economy and the nation, and that is what is happening all across Europe, in the United States. Every nation with a private central bank is now dealing with the same situation. The debt is simply unpayable, and at some point, we're going to see other nations follow the Icelandic example of simply shutting the banks down, throwing the bankers in prison, and simply saying the debt doesn't exist anymore. And obviously, that's a big problem for these private central bankers. They've been running this scam on planet Earth for 300 years, and that's a very, very good run. These people are so rich, they don't even show up on the world's richest lists because they're afraid that people will see what's really been going on. But you're absolutely right. Private central banking isn't about the ink and paper, the numbers and computer. It's about taking the real hard assets of the nation and placing it in the hands of a few lords and nobles. They're trying to, in a very real way, bring back feudalism and serfdom as the political and economic model for the New World Order.
You know, Mike, today in this country, national news is talking to teachers. Teachers are devastated in Britain. I know you know this because you got your finger on global events as much as you do, on the pulse of global events as much as you do on American events. By 2020, they want education to be completely privatised in this country. They want schools to be completely run by corporations. And they want to force as many teachers out of education as they can. And the rest of them, Mike, well, they'll just be absolutely browbeaten. Their spirit will be gone, and they'll just work for the corporations. We've seen this with all the junior doctors on strike in England today. They're doing exactly the same, making conditions unbearable for junior doctors, as well as doing other things with the health service to eventually privatise the entire service. And of course, at the pulling the strings of all of this are the very same private bankers you've just spoken about there. Israel plays a big part in all of this. Colm is listening to the programme in Dublin. Colm says, listening to Mike, very good stuff, but whoever gets in will swear allegiance to Israel, and Donald Trump won't be any different, he says. We keep beating you up about Trump, Mike. It's not as if Mike. It's not as if Michael.
You are beating me up with Trump, but you know what's really interesting? Trump came out and actually said why he's going easy on Israel. He's saying, I do business with companies in Israel, and I have to tread gently in order to keep those businesses going. And that is far more honesty than you get from these other candidates who are saying, I'm a friend of Israel. Israel's deserving of our love. And again, yes, we understand the realities. I mean, people who are working in Hollywood know that they can't criticize Israel or talk about Jewish domination of the corporate media, or they're going to be out of work. That's a reality everybody understands. But Trump is out there saying, yeah, I have to tread gently on Israel because I'm doing business with them and I don't want them to cancel the contracts. And that's a tremendous degree of honesty. And again, people are responding to that. And they're saying, yeah, we all understand Israel's tremendous influence over government and banking and media in this country. And Trump basically is acknowledging, yeah, they're calling a lot of the shots for the United States of America, whereas you have all these other politicians who are denying that, Israel has any influence over the U.S. government, which we know is an absolute joke.
Mike, the supporters of Bernie Sanders thrilled with his victory in New Hampshire yesterday, but as you and I know, there are primaries on the way coming very soon where the dollar speaks louder than New Hampshire, and spending is very important. Is it a hollow victory for Sanders, Mike? Can we expect it? Can we expect to look back on it in a few weeks and say, well, it didn't really mean much because the Hillary campaign will kick in now? How do you read that?
Well, the corporate media in the United States is already saying that New Hampshire was a fluke and it doesn't really matter. But what's really interesting is the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Jeb Bush campaign are far and away the best funded campaigns, and they're not really doing very well. Jeb is just absolutely thrashing around on the ground. He's got huge amounts of money to spend, but he can't get anywhere. Hillary is being a little more effective, but there's already allegations that there's a massive amount of election fraud going on. Down in Iowa, it's now been proven that the Iowa Democratic Party was arbitrarily stealing delegates from Bernie Sanders and giving them to Hillary Clinton. And there's another little wrinkle that has surfaced regarding New Hampshire, because even though Bernie Sanders absolutely trounced Hillary Clinton, Hillary and Bernie are going to walk out of New Hampshire with the same number of delegates each because of a mechanism known as the superdelegates. And the superdelegates are something that was set up in the wake of Richard Nixon's reelection so that the party leadership could decide that, well, we don't care what the voters think. We think this other candidate has a better chance of winning the White House. Of course, this was all set up before they realized that Richard Nixon's committee to reelect the president sabotaged all the Democrats so that Nixon could run against George McGovern and beat him handily. And Hillary seems to be doing the same thing over on the GOP side. She doesn't want to run against Trump. She's scared of running against Trump. She wants to run against Ted Cruz, who actually isn't even allowed to be president under the Constitution, or Marco Rubio, or somebody that she can steamroller over. But because of the superdelegate situation, Hillary got just as many delegates out of New Hampshire as Bernie Sanders did. And the American people are getting their noses rubbed in the fact that it doesn't matter how they vote anymore. Between the superdelegates and the party machinery and massive election fraud going on, the American people are learning a lesson. They've lost control of their own country. And it does call into question the very legitimacy not only of the elections, but of the federal government itself.
Mike, if they want Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States, and I believe the establishment does, the agenda does, this system, whatever people want to call them, they will rig the election, won't they? We've seen it in recent years. We saw it in Florida. We saw it in Idaho in 2004. If they want her in, it won't matter who runs against her. She'll just be in.
Well, that certainly seems to be the way it's going, but you need to understand something, especially when you have a nation of voters who are aware that there's massive election fraud, and they're looking, they're on the lookout for these things. Using election fraud to reverse a double-digit lead becomes too obvious, and everybody knows, that something happened. Now, there's a wonderful documentary HBO put out called Hacking Democracy. I think you can still find it on Netflix and Hulu and the rest of it. It was centered on a lady named Bev Harris, who runs a website called blackboxvoting.org, and she's just done an amazing job of documenting massive election fraud all over the country. And these electronic voting machines are set up to make stealing elections easy and invisible. And what's really amazing, when you look at the Diebold Corporation, they made their reputation building automated bank teller machines that never lost a penny from one end of the country to the other. They have a full audit trail. They're very secure. And yet, when this company went into the election machine business, they came out with a system with at least 12 known ways by which the election results could be changed without leaving a single trace. And it is a national scandal, and it is epidemic. It's a serious problem. But our best strategy, of course, is to educate the voting public that this is going on. And that it really is set up to steal elections. A lot of Americans are very surprised to find out that in those big national elections, the votes are not counted by the government itself or even by any citizens group. They're tabulated by a privately owned company that goes under the name Voters News Service, although it keeps changing its name to sort of hide what it's doing. And it's a private company owned by the major TV networks and two major newspapers in this country. And there is no citizen oversight. There's no double check of anything. The numbers go in there from the precincts across the country, and the next day, Voters News Service tells you who your rulers are going to be for the next,
That's an outrage,
4,
Mike.
6, 8 years.
That's an outrage.
Yeah, it is an outrage. There's absolutely no way of knowing whether our elections are honest or not. And my position here is very simple. I think a zero tolerance policy on election fraud. If a government cannot prove beyond all doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over the people, then the people are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government, to pay that government's bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the lives of our children in that government's constant wars of conquest.
No doubt about it. Has anybody, we've only got a few minutes left, we've got about another 4 or 5 minutes left, so I want to ask you, has anybody in any sort of, serious position, anybody close to power, anybody in politics, proposed returning to paper ballots? Because we hear this all the time from our listeners. I can't believe, Richie, that we're seeing these electronic voting booths being rolled out where I go in and I press a button. It's so easy to fix. Why are we not screaming from the rooftops? Why are some politicians not screaming from the rooftops to say, bring back the pencil and paper, Mike?
Well, because they're all beneficiaries of the current system, the rigged system. Certainly the American people want to go back to verifiable paper ballots, but everybody who wins an election, by and large, they understand they're the beneficiaries of this election fraud system. They're not going to do anything to challenge something that guarantees their continued employment in Washington, D.C. A lot of people keep scratching their head at how the voters of Arizona can keep returning John McCain to office time after time, or over in Nevada, Harry Reid, who's the epitome of political corruption and abuse. And the answer is that no, the voters aren't really that dumb. I remember when Obama got reelected in 2012, and the European press had headlines, "How could Americans be so stupid?" The answer is, we weren't.
Michael, it's remarkable. These are remarkable times. A couple of people have tweeted, as I've been listening to you there, I've been reading the tweets, saying, I want to read a tweet from Tristan. Tristan says, I really like listening to Mike, but he's a Trump apologist. Mike, I think what I've gathered from talking to you since Trump threw his hat into the ring is that when we've gone through the whole discussion about, the horrors of the reality that we get to choose between a bunch of multimillionaires and billionaires, as to who leads us. The whole system is absolutely rotten. And I'm not trying to defend you, but I think you have said time and time again that based on what's there now in front of the people, he's about the best bet. He's the best of a bad bunch, basically.
He is the least of several evils that are out there, and there's something important you need to remember. Donald Trump made his fortune in business. All these other candidates became wealthy as politicians. I mean, look at the hundreds of millions of dollars the Clintons have raked in. They didn't do that on a civil service salary. And, of course, there is this looming suspicion that Hillary Clinton was repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets for donations, and that weak private email server of hers on which were parked some of the nation's top secrets, darkest secrets, is a perfect system to allow for the delivery of those secrets to foreign governments, who could then make a very generous donation to her charitable foundation, which is legally allowed to accept money from foreign sources. And about 40% of the money that has gone into the Clinton Charitable Foundation, which doesn't really actually do much charity,
doesn't do anything,
has come from foreign sources.
Finally on that, and we'll leave you get on then, because you've got a show to prepare. Isn't it staggering the shameless lies that these people will tell? When you see her on CNN asked the real question for the first time in a long time, why did you take $675,000 from Goldman Sachs to give 3 speeches? Why did you do that? You knew you were going to be running for president. Well, that's what they offered me, she said. Massive line number one. I've never heard of a company saying, hey, Richie, will you come and give a speech for us? We'll give you £500. Ordinarily, it's, Richie, will you come and talk to us? How much do you charge? Number one. Number two, she says, I wasn't sure I was going to run. There isn't any levels these people won't stoop to, Mike.
Well, as a matter of fact, $225,000 is what Hillary does charge for a speech. And we posted a huge list of all the Wall Street companies that have had her come or Bill make a speech. And they all bottom at that $225. Some of them go a little bit higher. What you need to understand is a huge amount of money for a speech is actually a payoff for some favor that's been done somewhere else. Or in the corporate media, somebody lands a book deal with an $11 million advance payment. that's not really because they think the book is going to sell. It's because that's how you pay off somebody for something they did for you somewhere else. And as a matter of fact, Larry Klayman, who founded Judicial Watch, had a very strong RICO case against the Clinton Foundation. Unfortunately, it was assigned to a Clinton-appointed judge who refused to recuse himself over the obvious conflict of interest and then promptly threw the case out of court.
Michael, a pleasure, my friend. We'll get in touch with you again next month. Thanks for your outstanding analysis of the primaries this week and more besides. Folks, whatreallyhappened.com. Get on there. I know you're on there already. It's one of the great websites. Always a pleasure, Mike. Look after yourself.
Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to that. Bye for now. Sorry for the tiny occasional echoey sound on Mike's line there. We tried it in the ad break before he came on. There's a little bit of a technical fault, but we heard what he had to say.